So picture a UN peacekeeper for a second. What's the first thing that comes to mind?
Are usually like heavy armored vehicles,
Right. Armored vehicles rolling down some dusty street.
tactical gear, heavy weapons, just tense standoffs in war-torn cities.
Exactly. It's this very specific, heavily militarized Hollywood picture. But today, we're looking at a peacekeeper whose most effective weapons were, honestly, a dry erase whiteboard,
Yeah, a whiteboard.
a sincere willingness to listen, and the sheer unimaginable nerve to walk into a hostile militia camp entirely unarmed.
It's wild. It completely shatters that blockbuster movie version of global conflict, you know?
It really does.
We're so conditioned to think peace is, well, enforced by whoever has the bigger gun.
Yeah.
But the reality of how broken societies are actually put back together is, it's far more nuanced and frankly a lot more interesting.
And that is exactly the journey we're taking you on in today's deep dive. We are exploring the actual on-the-ground career of Sergeant Major Gauthama Dass.
Right, a veteran officer from the Royal Malaysia Police.
Yep. He deployed on United Nations missions to both Timor-Leste and Sudan. And our mission here isn't to just, rehash broad political headlines or geopolitical treaties.
Yeah, they want to bypass all of that.
Exactly. We want to uncover what international peace building actually looks like in the dirt, in the classrooms, at the gates of refugee camps.
Because while the logistics of UN policing are a major factor here, the underlying narrative is really a masterclass in human psychology.
Oh, absolutely.
It's about how individuals operate when the social contract is just completely disintegrated.
Right. So to understand how you rebuild a social contract from scratch, we have to look at his first major deployment, which was in 2012.
The Timor-Leste.
Yes, Timor-Leste. Operating under a UN mandate that was specifically designed to help this newly independent nation rebuild its fractured institutions. And the contrast on the ground is just striking.
Oh, the visual contrast is huge.
You've got buildings that are still visibly riddled with bullet holes, right? But they're standing right next to freshly paved roads.
Right, the scars of the past right next to the infrastructure of the future.
Exactly. And the public is in this incredibly delicate state. They're just beginning to learn how to trust a brand new domestic security force.
And trust in that kind of environment is arguably the hardest resource to generate. The trauma of conflict is etched into the architecture, sure, but it is deeply embedded in the minds of the citizens.
Right, you can't just flip a switch.
Exactly. When an entire population has experienced absolute institutional failure, you cannot just announce, hey, the new police force is trustworthy now.
Yeah, people aren't just going to buy that.
No, you have to manufacture that trust through reliable systems.
And this is where my expectations of, a blue helmet peacekeeper were completely subverted. Because Sergeant Major Dass wasn't sent to Timor-Leste to kick down doors or run tactical raids.
Not at all.
He was deployed as an IT trainer at the National Police Academy.
Which sounds so mundane, right?
Yeah. It does. He spent his days in this very basic classroom with super limited facilities, teaching young officers essential digital documentation skills. It almost feels contradictory.
How so?
Well, you have this massive international peacekeeping apparatus, and the tip of the spear is teaching someone how to use a spreadsheet.
Yeah, I get that. We often view administrative work and, IT training as mundane overhead.
Just paperwork.
Right. But think about the underlying mechanics of a functional society. Establishing a reliable digital framework is the absolute bedrock of institutional transparency.
Okay, unpack that a bit.
Well, if a citizen goes to the police to report a crime, and that report is scribbled in a disorganized paper ledger.
Oh, right. It can easily get lost.
Or altered. Exactly. Accountability completely disappears.
Yeah.
And the moment accountability disappears, public trust vanishes right along with it.
That makes perfect sense. It's like being asked to install a state-of-the-art smart home system in a house where the walls are still smoking from a fire.
That is a great analogy.
You can't have justice if the incident report goes missing. Digitizing the system forces a permanent, trackable record. It forces accountability.
And taking that a step further, the way Dass taught these systems was critical. Because he didn't just stand at the front of the room barking orders through a translator.
Right. I was wondering about the language barrier. How did he handle that?
Well, because he was from Malaysia, he utilized the Malay language. And linguistically, Malay is very close to Indonesian.
Oh, which the locals in Timor-Leste would understand because of their history.
Exactly. That linguistic bridge was a massive advantage. It changed the entire dynamic of the classroom.
I bet. It makes it so much more personal.
Yeah, when an international instructor can communicate directly without the buffer of an interpreter, It strips away that foreign, sterile nature of the interaction.
He's not just some outsider reading a UN manual.
Right. He became an accessible mentor. That shared linguistic space allowed him to build genuine bonds, which meant the technical knowledge transferred much faster and took root way deeper.
So building that institutional confidence in a classroom is the necessary first step. You know, the spreadsheets are clean, the young officers feel prepared.
But a simulation only goes so far.
Exactly. Eventually, that newly established confidence has to withstand real-world pressure. And for Timor-Leste, that pressure cooker arrived during the presidential and parliamentary election.
Yeah, elections in a post-conflict, newly independent nation are existential moments.
The stakes are incredibly high.
The highest. The potential for a relapse into violence is at its absolute peak during an election.
So the security apparatus went into overdrive nationwide. Dass and his fellow international police officers left their classrooms and were deployed directly to the entrances of the polling stations.
Right on the front lines of democracy.
Yep. They stood there as highly visible symbols of neutrality. They watched as citizens lined up to fulfill their democratic duties, and, you know, it was considered a massive success. But I want to push back on the mechanics of this for a moment.
Okay, let's hear it.
How does standing by a door in a blue beret actually create stability? I mean, you teach some computer classes, you stand by a door, and suddenly a post-conflict nation is a stable democracy. A uniform doesn't stop a coordinated attack.
You're looking at it through a purely tactical lens.
Fair enough.
The presence of those international officers wasn't about physical enforcement. It was entirely about psychological safety.
Psychological safety, okay.
Put yourself in the shoes of a voter in that environment. For years, uniforms and armed individuals were heavily associated with oppression, with unpredictability and violence.
Right. If you saw a uniform, bad things were usually about to happen.
Exactly. So for a citizen to just walk out of their front door and stand in a public area to cast a ballot.
That requires a massive psychological leap of faith.
A huge leap.
Huh.
They have to believe the chaos won't immediately return. And that is exactly what the Blue Beret provides. The international peacekeepers had zero stake in the local political outcome.
They didn't care who won.
Right? They were strictly neutral observers. So by placing that neutral international presence at the physical threshold of the polling station, it completely changed the atmosphere.
It kind of severed the historical association between security forces and political violence.
Yes. It provided the psychological safety net necessary for a traumatized population to take that leap of faith.
Yeah.
It demonstrated the resilience of the Timorese people, but it also proved that sometimes the most powerful thing a peacekeeper can do is simply be a calm, unbothered presence in a historically volatile space.
That is a really fascinating way to look at it. It's a story of a nation learning to breathe again, supported by these invisible frameworks of psychological trust and digital accountability.
It's beautiful in its own way.
It is, but the trajectory of Sergeant Major Dass's career takes a very sharp, intense turn from here. Because the mechanics of peacekeeping change entirely when you're sent to an environment where the conflict is not in the rearview mirror.
Right. We're moving from a place of healing to a place that is actively burning.
Exactly. The shift to the UNAMID mission in Darfur, Sudan, it's just a jarring sensory and operational contrast.
Oh, completely. The environment completely flips.
Yeah, we leave the island nation and enter a vast, scorching desert. Darfur at this time is defined by overcrowded refugee camps and a profound, heavy sense of human suffering.
It's a desperate situation.
And Dass was stationed at the Kutum team site in North Darfur. This is a region plagued by active, unpredictable, armed conflict. You've got rebels, local militias, government forces.
It's highly volatile.
And what really stands out here is that he had to wear two completely different operational hats in this deeply hostile environment.
And that dual nature of his assignment is a study in extreme cognitive adaptability. I mean, it is rare to see someone tasked with both the macro-level logistics and the micro-level survival simultaneously.
Let's break those hats down, actually. First, he is a patrolling officer. This means he is physically outside the wire.
In the dust.
Right. Navigating these highly unpredictable routes that are constantly prone to ambushes. He's moving between shifting refugee camps, reading the terrain, maintaining this intense hypervigilance just to keep his team alive.
That alone is a full-time, exhausting job.
But then, he returns to the base, takes off that hat, and puts on his second hat. Acting Team Site Operation Officer.
Right.
In this role, he is the central nervous system of the entire base. He's analyzing threat reports, coordinating with the Sudanese police, managing non-governmental organizations, and making high-level logistical decisions.
Which is incredibly complex.
I am just trying to imagine the mental whiplash of this. How do you switch off the survival instinct that kept you alive during a morning patrol to go, balance resource spreadsheets and run diplomatic meetings in the afternoon?
It requires a severe compartmentalization of the mind. Because in an active zone like Darfur, an operations officer isn't just a bureaucrat.
They're not just pushing paper.
No. They are the fragile connective tissue between highly vulnerable civilians and the bare minimum resources required to sustain human life. When Dass was running those meetings, he wasn't just managing a calendar.
Right, because every logistical choice has a direct physical consequence on the ground.
Every single one. Deciding which route a water convoy takes. Prioritizing which refugee camp gets a security patrol today.
Or who doesn't get one.
Exactly. Determining how to share sensitive intelligence with a medical NGO. That is a literal life-or-death calculus.
Wow.
If he makes a miscalculation in the operations room, someone on the patrol route pays the price. He had to maintain the situational awareness of a combat veteran while executing the resource management of a diplomat.
And that delicate balance, that constant life-or-death calculus, it culminated on one specific afternoon. It led to what is arguably the most defining high-stakes moment of his entire career.
You're talking about the incident on April 5th, 2017.
Yes. So let's set the scene. Main gate of the Khartoum base. A group of ethnic Fur women refugees arrives in a state of absolute distress. They're terrified.
They're holding their children, their clothes are tattered, they're crying. Their camp had just been raided by the Janjaweed.
Which is a deeply feared local armed militia operating in that region.
Right. The militia had swept through, stolen their food supplies, taken their meager belongings, and thoroughly trampled their dignity.
It's devastating.
Dass's immediate reaction was logistical. He secured emergency aid from the World Health Organization so these families can eat that very night.
Which is great, but
providing a single meal doesn't solve the structural threat.
yeah.
The perpetrators were still out there holding the stolen goods.
Right.
So the very next morning, Dass initiates what is officially called a diplomatic patrol straight into the Janjaweed militia camp.
Keep in mind, this is an actively hostile, heavily armed militia camp that had just conducted a violent raid hours prior.
Yes, and this is the moment that truly shocked me. Here's where it gets really interesting. He did not go in with a heavily armed convoy.
No.
He walked into that camp wearing 0 weapons.
None. He walked in wearing his UN blue uniform, bringing only his established reputation.
It's unbelievable.
He sat down with the militia leader, engaged in a tense negotiation, and incredibly, the leader agreed to return the stolen food to the refugees.
It is just a staggering display of nerve.
It's like a high-stakes poker game where he walked to the table showing an empty hand. I mean, a normal military instinct is to send in the cavalry to take back what was stolen. He walked in with 0 firepower.
Right, but if we look past the audacity of it, we actually find a brilliant application of conflict psychology.
Okay, I need to understand the mechanics of this. Why on earth would a heavily armed militia leader who has a monopoly on violence in that specific area hand food back to an unarmed man?
It seems counterintuitive.
It really does. Walking in without weapons seems like a guarantee that you won't be taken seriously. Or worse, that you'll become a casualty yourself.
Think about the typical escalation dynamic in a war zone. If Dass had rolled up to that camp with heavily armored vehicles and weapons drawn, what happens?
They fight.
Exactly. He would have instantly triggered a defense mechanism. It would have forced a violent confrontation because armed groups respond to force with force to maintain their status.
So by walking in unarmed, he is essentially removing the oxygen from the fire.
Yes.
He's entirely removing the threat they are prepared to fight against.
Exactly that. It scrambles their standard operating procedure. But, and this is key, the absence of weapons only works if it is replaced by something equally weighty.
And in this case, that was his reputation.
Right. True authority in a conflict zone, the kind that actually alters behavior, rarely comes from a gun. Violence is transactional, it's temporary. But respect is a currency that holds its value even among violent actors.
Wow.
Dass had spent months building a reputation of fairness, neutrality, and deep community connection.
So he leveraged his moral authority instead of physical force.
He did. When he sat down unarmed, he forced the militia leader to engage with him human to human rather than combatant to combatant.
Which changes the whole power dynamic.
Totally. Returning the food to an unarmed man who commands immense local respect doesn't make the militia leader look weak. In a twisted way, it actually allows the leader to display magnanimity.
Oh, that is fascinating.
Das understood that psychological loophole and exploited it perfectly to get the food back without firing a single shot.
It completely redefines what power looks like in a crisis. But that brings up a crucial point. You don't just, manifest that kind of life-saving reputation out of thin air.
No, definitely not. It isn't issued to you along with your uniform.
Right. It's cultivated through incredibly deliberate, often unglamorous daily work.
Which leads us into the core philosophy of community policing that Dass utilized.
Yes, exactly. He held routine, continuous meetings with the leaders of the refugee camps. He didn't just show up to give directives, he showed up to listen.
Just to listen.
He sat with grieving mothers who had lost children to the conflict. He listened to mundane complaints about water distribution, and he listened to their visceral fears of impending attacks.
Which, in an environment defined by total chaos, just the act of an international officer sitting down to sincerely listen provided a profound measure of comfort.
He even received official UN recognition for this crisis management approach. But let me play the skeptic for a second.
Let's do it.
Let's be real. In an active war zone where militias are raiding camps, is listening to complaints actually a genuinely effective strategy? Or is it just a form of international customer service to make people feel heard while the world burns? Like, how does empathy stop a bullet?
This raises an important question, and it's a very common skepticism. We tend to view empathy as a soft skill, entirely separate from tactical security.
Right.
But we have to understand the feedback loop of trust in a hostile environment. Listening is not just about providing emotional comfort. It is the single most vital intelligence-gathering tool a peacekeeper possesses.
Oh, so it's not just holding a space for them to vent. It has real operational value.
Immense operational value. When an officer sits down and listens to a complaint about a broken water pump, they aren't just hearing about water. They're learning about the daily movement and friction points of resources.
That makes a lot of sense.
When they listen to a seemingly paranoid fear about a new group of armed men moving into the area, they are mapping the shifting dynamics of local threats. Listening builds intelligence.
And if you act on that intelligence fairly, it proves to the community that you're actually paying attention.
Which builds trust. And trust is the ultimate preventative measure. When a community trusts you, they actively warn your patrols of improvised explosives. They share critical information about militia movements.
They become your eyes and ears.
Exactly. They bring their disputes, like the stolen food, to you, instead of immediately retaliating and sparking a generational blood feud. Listening gathers intelligence, intelligence builds trust, and trust disrupts the cycle of violence before a weapon is ever drawn.
That feedback loop reframes the entire concept of community policing. It's the invisible foundation that allowed him to walk into that Janjaweed camp and walk out with the supplies.
Without a doubt.
And this entire approach is crystallized in a specific proverb that Dass adopted as his guiding philosophy. It goes like this. A problem is a burden to be dealt with, but a challenge is the real meaning we choose to give our struggles to turn problem into triumph.
The distinction between a problem and a challenge is the psychological key to surviving this kind of work.
Unpack that posture for us. Why is that distinction so important when you're literally surrounded by suffering?
Well, if you look at the bullet-hole buildings of Timor-Leste or the devastated refugee camps of Darfur and label them as problems, the natural human response is to feel entirely overwhelmed.
Because it's too big.
Exactly. The scale of the suffering is objectively too massive for one IT trainer or one operations officer to fix. A problem feels heavy, it induces paralysis, cynicism, and eventually total burnout.
You just shut down because you obviously can't fix a civil war.
Right. But if you consciously reframe those exact same circumstances as a challenge, your mental posture shifts.
Oh, so?
A challenge demands forward momentum. It is an opportunity to find a micro-solution no matter how small.
Right.
Teaching a single officer how to use a computer is a triumph over the challenge of lost records. Getting a single bag of food back for a crying mother is a triumph over the challenge of militia intimidation.
Wow.
This mindset prevented him from being crushed by the weight of global conflict, allowing him to meet the human beings standing right in front of him.
And that brings the lens right back to you, the listener. Because the ultimate takeaway from dissecting Sergeant Major Gauthama Dass's deployments isn't just about understanding UN logistics or the geopolitical history of Sudan.
No, it's far more personal than that.
It's about how we process the friction, the conflicts, and the obstacles in our own daily lives.
The scale of the environment changes, sure, but the fundamental human psychology is identical.
When you hit a wall at work, when you face a breakdown in your community, or when you are navigating a deeply personal conflict, how do you categorize it?
Do you label it a problem and let the burden paralyze you?
Or do you actively choose to frame it as a challenge, an opportunity to find a small, meaningful triumph that moves things forward? What this exploration reveals is that peace is rarely a grand sweeping treaty signed by politicians in a boardroom.
Almost never.
True stability is built in the micro-interactions. It's built by patiently teaching the basics when the walls around you are still scarred. It's built by sitting down to sincerely listen to a grievance when your instinct is to rush to the next task.
And it is built by having the quiet courage to show up unarmed, bringing only your principles, your reputation, and your willingness to engage. As we step away from this incredible operational history, consider the broader direction of our world today.
Oh, this is an interesting thought.
We are moving rapidly into an era where security and conflict resolution are increasingly outsourced to technology. We rely on artificial intelligence to predict behavior, remote drone surveillance to monitor borders, algorithmic threat detection to keep populations safe.
Yeah, the human element is getting phased out.
Exactly. But after examining the raw reality of the ground in Darfur, we are left with a critical question. Can a machine, no matter how advanced, ever replicate the localized human empathy required to sit in the dust and truly listen to a grieving mother?
Man, that's heavy.
Or is the human element, that fragile, unarmed reputational courage, the one vital piece of the puzzle that technology can never replace?
That is a heavy, essential question to carry forward. Thank you for joining us on this exploration today. Keep challenging your assumptions, always look for the mechanics behind the headlines, and remember that sometimes the most powerful disruptive action you can take is simply choosing to listen. We will catch you on the next deep dive.